The team has put a lot of effort into building a very well-knit set of technologies that enable this journey that I'm excited to share with you. And the reason I sort of took the approach of talking about the journey more than the technology was, having been a CIO, I was a CIO for EMC. We were a $20+ billion company at the time. And it took the helm of the company as CIO when the onset of the last downturn, 2008. And it's an interesting time to be in technology because the business asked you to take costs out of IT and in turn scale the capabilities of IT to take care of the business when they're trying to be more prudent and more efficacy around how they spend things. And I learned more in my tenure as a CIO than I probably learned in the 25 years prior to that, or 20 odd years before that. And the reason I sort of took this topic was because I had a team. It was a large team. And Reza at the back. Reza, raise your hand. Reza Markabadi over there was one of my business unit CIOs. In other words, the role he had was interfacing into the business and as their CIO. And he was part of my senior leadership team. But I had folks on my team, much like yourselves, the same sort of backgrounds. I looked at the profiles of the people here, who knew more about IT in their pinkies than I would know in a lifetime. And I learned very quickly, and that's about the only thing I consider myself smart on, was how do I tap into this incredible wealth of knowledge and passion that existed in the IT organization. And it was amazing because when I would talk to my IT team, doesn't matter what part of the IT organization, it was almost like they felt they weren't doing a good job. And it blew my mind. It blew my mind because I had done the build part of IT as a services person. I had done the deploy part of IT as a services person. I had never done the run part of IT as a services person. And that was the hard part. That was where the rubber hit the road. That's where I talk about having a ringside seat to the circus that sometimes is IT, not because of their own doing, but because of the stuff that's handed to you. I will say to you, in the context of digital transformation or digital mandate, no one can lead that effort in any company today outside of the IT professionals and the IT leadership that exists. People can come up with new titles, and we can debate them. But it really is the coming together of IT professionals who don't have to talk business anymore because the technology is kind of understood and can really do the things that we need to do. Because you see the business left to right. It doesn't matter if you're a business analyst or you're running applications or you're running platforms or you're running security or you're running DevOps. You see the business left to right. Every aspect of it. Who's more suited to getting that right than you? And I will say to you, your CIOs are looking at you and your teams to show them the way. I used to always ask the question because it baffled me because I was so in love with the run part of our business when I became CIO. When my team would say, we want to get this technology in place, we want to put this in, whether it be infrastructure or applications or anything else, I'd go, but who's going to do it? Who's going to make it come alive? How? How's that miraculously going to happen? And if they didn't have a good plan of action about the people, individuals, names, teams, not third parties, our people that owned it, very high likelihood I wouldn't sign off on it. Not that round anyway. I'd let them go sweat it a little more. Digital transformation mandate, it's not complicated for IT folks. What has, in my opinion, held us back is a little what I talked about in the morning, is having that roadmap that enables you to move forward. I say this in jest. We taught business gigahertz, megaflops, MIPS, petabytes, bandwidth. These terms, we taught the business that. IT folks taught the business that. They didn't talk that. We made them unlearn business talk to learn IT talk. It's time for us to unlearn the IT talk so we can have business talk. Make sense? No? Yes? And that's how we get the digital conversation. It isn't magic, folks. You do it every day. Your teams do it every day. I would urge you to not have the tech conversations and have the great business conversations, because the technology is flat. Everybody knows what we're doing today. If I was CIO today, I wouldn't have a technology conversation with anybody. So I'm hoping that the effort we're putting in Puppet and our ecosystem, in a small way, we're a small part of that ecosystem, enables the journey, the digital journey. In fact, I'm writing a book, and most of my own team don't know this, that encapsulates the journey from CIO to CEO. And it's a digital journey. It's about taking your business and making it digital. And it's not really hard. You just need to know which battles to fight. And technology isn't one of them. So with that, I'm going to pause and look around the room to see whether I've completely confused you, or hopefully provoked you into thinking and asking me some questions. Maybe 1 or 2 questions. Yes, no? This is a really weird room because I've got lights in my eyes and I can't see you. I'm sure there are people out there. Well, I'm around for the next 2 days. I would say to you one more time, as the CEO of a tech company, it's not so much about the tech. It's about your team and your team's ability to lead and deliver the magic that makes that technology real. Okay? In every single way, I would say IT needs to lead. It's IT's time to lead. And don't do it the hard way. Automate the heck out of it. If you're doing it more than once, or you have a single point of failure, or you've had an outage, those are all perfect instances of where you go automate. That's where you start. That's what gets you to 15% ASAP. Like that. Fix those mission-critical outages with automation, not Band-Aids and remediation. Okay? I wish I had more time. I know you've got a packed agenda. I am very pleased that we've been able to line up Rob Stroud from Forrester. I've known Rob for a while. He's a good critic of what we do. He's also a good champion of what we do, and quite the authority in the space around DevOps and automation. And it gives me great pleasure to bring up Rob and introduce him. Be nice to us, Doug. Be nice to us.
I'm always nice to you. You know that. I'm always nice. It's great to see you all. It's great to be here. Thank you for bringing me back to San Francisco for week 3 of 4. For those of you who are here quite regularly, I live in New York. Can't you tell by the accent? It's a deep New York accent. It's from the deep south of New York, Sydney, Australia. But I say that right now to kind of get you used to it, because for the next 4 days, you'll just be listening to me. Oh, sorry, it's only 40 minutes, isn't it? Oh, well, that's a pain. But I have enough slides forever, and what I want to talk about today is some things that are really happening in the industry, things that are transitioning, things that are changing. When I took this job at Forrester 2 years ago, one of the reasons why I took it was the market is fundamentally transforming, and you heard a lot of it in the keynote this morning, and you saw demonstrations of it. Because we are all about speed. When Sanjay was at EMC, one of the things he had to do was reduce costs and drive value and squeeze as much blood out of the stone as he could. And today, we see CIOs fundamentally transitioning their business to speed, velocity, delivering quicker, delivering faster. Because if we don't deliver quicker, then we are in fundamentally putting our whole business at risk. But the reality of it is that 64% of businesses, according to a recent survey we did, said that they were dissatisfied with the release velocity of your organization. In fact, just a year ago, when I did a survey on how fast people deploy technology to production, the average time was over 3 months. I'm pleased to say that in a year, we've got to a point where 23% of enterprises worldwide are now deploying to production systems on a monthly basis. And that is a significant improvement. Now, many of you in this room are probably deploying daily, hourly, minutely. But the reality of it is that you are the ones that are really leading the edge, the charge there. And very interestingly, Europe is deploying far faster than the US. And it's a really interesting conundrum. But if you look at this, one of the challenges and opportunities I see every day as I talk to organisations, especially in fintech, and there's some fintechs here, or some financial organisations here, one of the things is your business is being rapidly Uberized or challenged by the fintechs. The insurance techs by the insurance techs. Amazon is absolutely disrupting retail. The world is fundamentally changing. We have to get quicker to deliver. So I've used the term that DevOps has reached escape velocity, meaning it's not the fad we talked about 3 years ago. When I was doing a positioning paper, a strategy paper for an organisation I used to work for, DevOps was this concept that was never going to happen. Well, actually, the data does not support that. The data says now that organisations are doing DevOps. 50% of organisations in our most recent survey said they were in the process of implementing DevOps right now. Now, I can tell you from looking at those organisations and what they're doing, it's varying between pilots and mainstream, but the interesting thing is now I'm seeing organisations, financial services, government, healthcare, all implementing DevOps and all changing the way they do business. And actually, we saw some technologies in the earlier keynote that talked about how it's happening. But DevOps is not here for technology. The point Sanjay just made about the fact that now you've got to talk about the business and business capabilities is clear. DevOps is just a way to deliver on the promise of business transformation. It's allowing us to take that new feature and function that comes up in a meeting with a client by a salesperson or a business person. It's allowing us to take that and empower it and deliver it. Now, some of you may bank with a bank that recently implemented the ability to bank or to use an ATM without your debit or credit card. You can actually use your mobile device now, go up to the ATM and get money out, deposit money, use it. That's a differentiated feature, and one of the banks that implemented that told me it came from a discussion with an end user who called the service desk, the helpline, the customer helpline, and said, I can't find my debit card, but I need money. Now, it's a really interesting transformation, but the other interesting thing is that if you use DevOps and use a pipeline that is actually totally integrated, you're going to dramatically reduce defects. An organisation, and we call it escape defects at Forrester. So an escape defect is a defect that's in code that is found by an end user. One organisation I recently did a case study on, just 10 years ago, had 100% of defects found by end users. 100%. They have now implemented DevOps, they now have curated pipelines, and they are down to 7% of escape defects. Their target for the end of this year is 5%. They have done that while at the same time transitioning their business and have transitioned from annual releases to now where they can release daily. And they do major releases on a monthly basis because their customers are saying, we can't consume the change faster than that. It's clearly an interesting change. By the way, the dev teams are now developing new features and functions instead of driving the defects and working on those endless life cycles of when you roll things out. But not only that, if you implemented a curated process end to end, you can enforce compliance. I get this argument all the time. We can't do DevOps. We're a compliant organisation. Yes, you can. You can absolutely curate the pipeline and drive compliance through an automated mechanism so it cannot be avoided. So where's velocity happening? And I've talked a little bit about it already, but a really interesting one use case I want to share with you is an organisation just starting on DevOps. The first application they did was an internal application, a safety application. They call it Be Safe. So they got a sprint team together, and in that sprint team, the ops person's there, the database person's there, security person's there. The sprint team started on a concept that they wanted you to be able to walk around their organisation, and it's a manufacturing organisation. And if you see a health and safety issue, you just take a photo of it and send it in to an email address. Simple as that. That's version 1. That was the MVP. Took them 30 days to code it, but they did that MVP because they wanted to learn the whole DevOps process. They wanted to learn how to work in a curated pipeline. They wanted to learn how to work together as a team. They wanted to learn how they could do automatic deploys, how they could build automated testing into the life cycle. After 3 months, they suddenly at the wonderful velocity point where using the same app, now the end users of this app are sending in feedback, which is automatically picked up by the feedback loop, which automatically goes into the product backlog and is automatically pulled down by the product teams as they grow the product. Not only did they learn that, they've picked up that same methodology now and rolled that out to 3 other product teams. They've gone from 0 DevOps to now 4 product teams doing DevOps in a period of 6 months. But more importantly, they've changed their whole culture and the way that organisation goes about doing their business. To now new IT people coming in straight from college and university want to work for this organisation, which was seen as a traditional laggard in their market space. Unbelievable transition, 6 months, and they're just going on. Now, one of the interesting things about DevOps is we do a heat map every year, and by the way, for purposes, I always think heat is hot, so it should be red, but my graphics people tell me it should be brown. So if you're brown, you're hot, and if you're green, you're not. But not to worry about that. But if you look at the domains and industry specifics, what I can tell you from inquiries, and we're taking the inquiry load on DevOps is doubling quarter over quarter right now. I can tell you that financial services, insurance, and banking are the #1 area of calls now. These organisations are rapidly adopting DevOps practices. They're changing their processes. They're looking at their teams. They're transitioning into product teams and changing the way they go about doing things. And I can tell you that the other interesting area that's come out of nowhere this year is manufacturing. Manufacturing and retail have really started to adopt and adapt and leverage their processes to drive velocity. But the reality of it is that every business needs to transition what they do. But the fundamental issue is what I call silos of automation. Now, if you look at my bio back far enough, you'll see that I was involved in this wonderful framework called ITIL a few years ago. Now, our ITIL is 25 years young this year, or 500 years old, as some people describe it to me now. But we've set up these wonderful silos. I don't know if your organisations have them. You've got the service desk and the incident team and the problem team and the change team and the dev team and the QA team and this team and that team. And fundamentally right now, each of these teams is busy on a journey of excellence within their silos. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drive incidents down to the lowest possible time as quickly as I can. And what I'll do is to make sure I have no incidents, I'll go and put these obstructive processes in place. I will go and help you. You must notify me of a change 4 million years before you want to implement it. Now, I'm exaggerating, of course, but the reality of it is we've seen this, right? Some of you have lived this. One of the things we need to do is destruct these silos. You need to break them down. You need to destroy them. And you need to look at processes that go across the whole life cycle. Because I can tell you right now that from ideation or that backlog item right through to delivery, you need to look at that curated pipeline and curated process. Now, I know you probably can't read that from the back, but the reality of here is I can tell you that as people and organisations go to implement DevOps, there are 3 major stumbling points that we've identified. And 3 what we call disconnects. 3 areas where things break down. Number 1 is the CI/CD pipeline. Continuous integration, continuous delivery. We see that be an area where people go and will use one tool and they'll say, oh, let's transition over to another. Or let's transition a product to another team. Or let's totally destroy the process. Or let's not use automation. Or this team uses that tool, so we have to start again. What happens here is you have this disconnect, these teams beating on each other. One of the challenges, and maybe your organization has that situation. That's one area you need to look at. You need to think through. You need to understand how do you build that, those bridges so that those teams can talk to each other. The second area, as you can imagine, is automatically delivering configurations and configuration management. Do you know that's still a major problem for many organizations in development? We've got our ops stuff really slick. We're delivering environments in seconds, well, days anyway. All right, we've got it down pat, it's working, it's good. And then in dev, they're busy manually building environments or using images that don't replicate production. That's a really big disconnect right now, and that leads to significant failure in production environments. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then, of course, the third area is that magical area of when we go from we're finished testing, we're finished QA, we're finished staging, we're ready to go to production, and of course we've now got to hand off to a totally different team. Forward-thinking organisations are now transitioning the way they do things so that they will look to do that push all the way from development to production in one seamless process. It may be 8 tools, it may be 6 teams, it may be 1 team, but they're doing it in a simultaneous fashion with an integrated or curated tool set, opinionated or not, doesn't really matter, but you're really looking to drive that through to production. You know, one of the interesting stats I just pulled out of a research paper we did is 24% of decision makers never use change and configuration management tools. Now, I would say it's probably 0% in this room, or close to, but the reality of it is that every time I go to an organisation, I'm talking through the basics of configuration management. And then if you're doing that, why are you not looking at the ability to automate configuration management everywhere? Why are you not looking at the ability to do what we call the deployment of automate infrastructure, deliver infrastructure as code, and not just leverage that in production, but leverage it in development as well? Everything is software today. All right, you say, well, actually, Rob, there's a piece of hardware somewhere. Well, yeah, there is. But you can configure that software from code. So I gave the example already that I want to talk about a bit more. Why wouldn't you go and treat the development of your operating environments, your operational platforms, why wouldn't you treat that the same way you develop code? Follow the software development lifecycle. Follow the development methodologies. If you're going to do a change, why wouldn't you check that code in to your source repository and then push it through the same testing sets that you would push production applications? Forward-thinking organisations, the ones that you see a lot that are really into cloud and DevOps and velocity, that's exactly what they're doing. They're treating database configurations, infrastructure configurations, every type of configuration as code. It's all getting checked into the source repository. And then when you go across that CI/CD check where you go to testing, what you're doing is you're effectively doing a build or a release at that point, and you are pulling all the current production and proposed production versions together, so you are testing a production-esque environment. And by the way, we talk about pets versus cattle. I'm a strong advocate. No one should have access to a data center. No one should have access to the physical equipment anymore, because you should be pushing it all in an automated fashion with code. So I'm very pleased, and by a total twist of fate, I'm presenting you today on a report that went live 3 hours ago, which is the Forrester Wave on configuration management. And although I can't give necessarily opinions on the vendors here, you will see that in terms of configuration management, we clearly at Forrester see a couple of leaders in terms of the leaders in this area. 2 of them, Chef and Puppet, more importantly, with the Puppet production version. The way you read this is the further to the right you are, the better your strategy is. And you can all see which product is furthest to the right. And then the other aspect of this as well, we also look at execution. Now, one of the things, if you look at this particular document is very narrowly focused on configuration management and automation. But you'll also see that it's actually a very interesting and complex market because there's more and more vendors in it all the time. But we are seeing more and more enterprises make a choice, this is one of the points I really want to share, to actually go to the supported versions. Open source is cool. We love open source. By the way, I'm a strong advocate of open source. Whenever I talk to people about DevOps, I say start with open source. But we are clearly seeing a transition to supported software because there's more bells and whistles and things like that in it, but more capabilities, but also more areas to help you. But as you saw in the end of the keynote today, configuration management is not the only area that's changing. The way we deploy to production is changing as well. And we're seeing more and more organizations start to look at building the full stack, and you might hear the term release or release packages, but we are seeing more and more organizations transition to building release packages that include all the components required, middleware, infrastructure, applications. Maybe it's container-based, maybe it's not. Maybe it's got a platform as a service involved in it, maybe it's not. But what we're starting to see is organizations really start to transition the way they do things to deploy complete packages. And they may choose to build those packages in one of two ways or three ways. Number one, traditional CLI and scripting works effectively. Number two, calling APIs and building things through API calls. And number three, using graphical user experience to build these packages together and then release them. Now, the interesting concept is instead of moving just a piece of code through the life cycle, you will move through the whole release package. Now, you might say, well, Rob, that's a lot of code to move. Well, it's not always binaries. Sometimes it's scripts to create binaries. But the reality of this is that as you get to production, you can see exactly what you have and where you want to be. And a great example of that was the recent WannaCry piece of malware, and I love this example, and many people shared it with me, is that when we went out there and when we looked at our configuration, if you're using your traditional configuration management and delivery of packages method, how would you know where a piece of open source is? How would you know where a particular vulnerable artifact is? How would you know where a bad piece of code is and which virtual appliances it's on or servers it's on? If you actually deploy release packages and update your repository as you deploy to production, you know exactly what's where and when. So in a case of WannaCry, you can do a quick scan of your estate. You know exactly where it is. You can go and identify the remediated patch, go run it through the SDLC, then hit the deliver button, and you're in production in seconds. One organization I know that had some potential WannaCry impacts, they went from identification of the defect to delivery of the outcome across their complete estate, telling management and executive leadership they were done in less than 2 hours. 2 hours. Another organisation using the same using different tools and doing it manually, using the old-fashioned way of, going and deploying things and then doing a scanning exercise to see what was where, and then doing a report. It took them 3 days to understand what was impacted, and with about a 60% probability of success. So the reality is we need to go about doing things differently. And at the end of the keynote today, we talked about pipelines. So we did this report 3 months ago, so it's not updated for some of the announcements that you've heard since then. But one of the things here, as you look to this whole thing, what we now call continuous delivery and release automation, where infrastructure is a key piece, where the delivery of your configuration is a key piece, we've seen an interesting transition where you can see tools like Puppet, for instance, leveraged and used as part of that end-to-end stack. And in fact, if you look at this once again, remember, right is strategy. You can see that the strategy of organizations such as Puppet is clearly on an intent to deliver this whole thing heterogeneously and completely. So as I move forward, one of the things I want to talk about, and I'm a big advocate of automation. Long history in operations in my career. Automation is key. Automation is fundamental. What is old is new again. And I remember in my early days in IT, one of the things I did is we created a lights-out data center. Right? Now it's standard practice, of course. But the reality of it is we used to have teams of operators who ran in every night and would run batch jobs and do schedules and print paper and send it out to people and stuff like that. We don't do that anymore necessarily. But the reality of today is it's all about automation. So one of the things I really want to talk about is security and compliance. It's the biggest detractor from DevOps that I see in the market right now. And I really want to tell you that one of the things you've got to do to bring security and compliance is look at that end-to-end pipeline. You've got to automate it all. And by the way, automation is far more successful than manual operations. How many people, how many humans, and I love doing this exercise as I go and do this all the time, because I say, right, let's create some paper planes. And I want everybody in this room to create the exact identical paper plane 100 times, one after another. Now, some of you in this room can do that. I cannot. By plane 3, I am already ideating, coming up with a different form factor, a different structure, looking for better velocity, looking for better strategy and things like that. But in an area of automation, you want repeatable, consistent, continual execution. The same is true with compliance. In compliance, the basic rule of compliance and security, well, security is important, but you actually have to be able to validate that what you are delivering is repeatable, consistent, audited, and repeatable. So if you're using an automation process and you build an automation tool chain, you build a pipeline, you might have different pipelines by different types of work, you can actually do that assurance. And I'm seeing organizations now deliver that and go what we call what we now call developer-driven release automation, or GitOps in some areas, where they are using tools like Puppet to really drive development. Once that change is done, all the steps are done, and it goes straight to production. So I want to move forward to what's next. And we touched on it just a little bit at the end of the session today. But you know, one of the things that I'm hearing more and more about in this new world is containers. One of the trends I can share with you at the moment is we are seeing containers adopted and adapted, and we are seeing traditional workloads now be containerized and moved into various production environments. And one of the beauties of containerizing a workload is you now have your choice of deployment areas. You can deploy on-premise, you can deploy in the cloud, you can deploy somewhere else, it doesn't really matter, but you get consistency, and once you containerize it, you can actually lock that workload and the components that make that workload and that container and do it consistently. So we're seeing a lot of containers. We're also seeing a lot of microservices, and there are other sessions that will get more into that, I'm sure, here. But if you look at microservices where you build these complex structures, one of the things about microservices and containers, you are building multiple components together. They interact with each other. They work with each other. They deliver application stacks or business value in an end-to-end format. They are now more complex than the human can actually maintain, and automation is fundamental to delivering it. And by the way, this is out of a Forrester report. This is what the traditional stack looks like for automation of containers and deployment delivery of containers. And you can see there's loads of vendors and lots of parts and curated and opinionated stacks. But one of the things you look at is, at the end of the day, what you're doing is you are automating a process and a delivery. You're understanding components. The difference in containers, or one of the differences, is that you are delivering it faster. You're rebuilding the packages faster. You might be actually pulling out one piece and popping in another and doing it in almost an instantaneous way. And this becomes an interesting challenge because as we go forward, and by the way, containers in development are not too bad to manage, but in production at scale, what happens if you have you're in retail and we come to Black Friday, my wife's favorite day, right? And suddenly you need to scale out everywhere. And you identify a bug suddenly. And you say, right, we need to change that microservice. And you rapidly ideate that microservice. And you resolve it, you fix it, and you deploy instantaneously. Containers give you that ability in an instantaneous manner. That would be difficult in a normal environment. So what we see in terms of this is you're going to use containers, you're going to use serverless, you're going to use traditional VMware, you're going to use all sorts of environments. You're going to use even mainframe. And I've just got one word on mainframe in just a moment. You're going to pull these components together. And for you, in terms of automation, these are all automation targets. These are all areas that you need to invest in, you need to understand the process, you need to build it out, and you need to deliver it. And you know, one of the things we do to help you with that in good DevOps methodology, good agile development methodology, is we develop in a lower fidelity in terms of changes. We do smaller changes more frequently, more consistently, so that we can get out to the end result, which is delivery of business service, delivery of business value, delivery of business transformation. Now, I just want to touch on metrics for a few seconds. And I'm sure many of you have read the 2017 Puppets report completed with Dora. There's lots of great metrics in there, lots of great data points in there. I really enjoy that report every time I read it, and I pulled just a couple of points out that really relate to automation. You know, a couple of things that are in there that you really want to see is, you know, we actually are seeing organisations automate their end user change approval process. That's an awesome thing to do, right? I don't know how many of you go through these major changes, but that's a great thing to do. What about configuration management? What about teams? But the reality of it is, if you are freeing up people from manual work, you are taking that headcount and making them available to do more value-adding work, and that's what we're about right now. We need to go and deliver more work, and we need to deliver more value, because at the end of the day, higher-performing organisations, and there's great data in that report, are doing things more successfully, with greater velocity, but they are impacting the organisation's just very sustainability and even profitability. You know, one organisation I love to give the examples of, and they don't like to be named, but in implementing a DevOps regime, implementing velocity, focusing on ideation, they are seeing their customer retention number go up dramatically. They are seeing customers stay because and especially their target demographic, which is under 30s right now. So what they're doing is they're softly ideating, they're ideating on a regular basis, they're rolling out consistent change, new features and functions, and doing it on a regular basis to really drive through the velocity that they need to deliver. And then you can look at the quality of products and services delivered. If you do DevOps well, by the very nature of the fact that you are testing, escape defects will reduce. If they're not reducing, then you need to look at your pipeline process. What are we testing for? How are we testing? Are we automating that testing? And we need to drive that out. So I just want to, as I come to time for just a couple of minutes of questions and answers, I do want to share with you one really interesting example of late, and that is I am now getting a growing number of inquiries from organisations with mainframes. Now, I don't know about you, but a lot of organisations have spent time just kind of isolating their mainframe, hiding it away. Let's build everything around the mainframe. Let's build all our competitive advantage around the mainframe. We'll just keep it as that big repository, right? And it's really interesting that a large organisation I'm working with in Europe, they've been doing DevOps for 3 years. So they're pretty progressed. All their teams now are really delivering systems of differentiation, and they're delivering it using cloud and driving value out through cloud. And one of the really interesting concepts that they realized is that actually we need to now look at the mainframe because we've actually done as much as we can do without leveraging and harnessing the value in our mainframe. So what they've gone and done is they are now leveraging their mainframe and applying the same agile techniques, the same DevOps discipline. They've gone and transitioned from application teams to product teams. They've gone and grabbed the operations expertise and popped that into the product team as well. They, of course, have kept their nice structured change process. And yes, they still do changes maybe every week on the weekend. But instead of doing changes twice a year, they recently got to the point where they are delivering consistently every month a new set of features and functions. And early next year, they're going to go to every 2 weeks. Now, they've staggered it in a way where the mainframe is part of an end-to-end change. They'll update the mainframe this weekend, then they'll use the next 2 weekends to drive all the other ideation that leverages those features. And they're using wonderful techniques like dark releases. So the features go out, the business turns them on, and the business leverages those features and drives them forward. So the mainframe can absolutely be a part of this stack. Now, tools, I've talked a lot about tools. At the end of the day, DevOps is about culture. It's about changing the way we work, changing the way we go about working. It's about being inclusive. It's about supporting experimentation. It's about allowing our people to make mistakes. I was doing a call this morning with an organisation in Europe. And I said, if you're not ready to allow experimentation and support your team when you fail, you're probably not ready for DevOps yet. Because if you want velocity, there will be mistakes. And mistakes are a learning event, and that's what we should leverage them for. I want to end with this slide, and then we'll have just a couple of minutes for questions. One of the things I like to use the term now is biz DevOps. I use that term, and you can see I don't use the infinity loop. And by the way, I'm open to all suggestions. Email me, Twitter me, text me, LinkedIn me, I don't care. I'm open to a different diagram from the current one that we have for DevOps, because more and more organizations I work with today are doing development, what we would call development, using low-code, no-code techniques right in their lines of business. I will share with you now, shadow IT is not going away. Shadow IT, we need to find another name for that too. Development of business functions, of business capability done directly within the business, deployed and leveraged and used on technology, wherever your technology is going to be normal going forward. And that's an example of my kids are far better programmers than me, and they were far better programmers than me, and I've lived my whole career in IT before they'd even exited high school. Because it's part of their DNA, it's part of what they do. And we've got languages that assist and drive that. So the requirement for us here in IT is we better have a curated end-to-end pipeline. We better have the testing automatically built in. We better have the capabilities to do that automatically built in, because we need to be ensuring that we deliver a secure, compliant, curated environment so the business can indeed execute on what they want to do. So with these things said, we've got a couple minutes left. There's a yellow warning light in front of me. That means we can open it up for a couple of questions. If any of you have got questions, feel free to ask. If you want to dig into anything, you can dig in. So have we got any questions right now? Otherwise, I'll make questions up of you, because I'm good at that. We got a question down here.
So when you're talking to board level people and other C-level managers,
You have to run. Microphone's coming to you right now.
yeah, so when you're talking to other business people, board members, other C-level people that are non-technology, what's the message you give to them to try and accelerate their thought pattern for the adoption?
Yeah, it's interesting. As you talk and Nicole's here as well, Nicole Forsgren, she'll be talking, I'm sure, touching on this as well when she speaks. But one of the things about that is I've had these discussions now. I talk about business execution and delivery and deployment and the ability to drive new products. So I'll talk about a retail store now that has reduced their, by implementing an integrated DevOps practice. Now teams are in the store are actually identifying business opportunities for new features and functions and pushing that straight through. That's getting prioritized directly, so that feedback loop is encouraged. I talk about the fact that escape defects can be reduced. Escape defects is one of those wonderful things that business like, and the reduction in number of days from an idea or ideation to deployment or delivery. That's another thing. It's a deployment to cache. We're all ideating on a metric for that right now, by the way. There's lots of thoughts about what it should be. But the reality is we want to talk about business benefits, how we can do things faster. Automation. The one of the things I love is one of the stats we have at Forrester is that a developer spends 20% of their, 20%, 8 hours a week usually writing code. So with automation and integrated pipeline, if I can just change that number to 12 hours a week, that's a 50% improvement, which means you should get 50% more features out the door. A very simple thing like that, right? And that works really well. That one worked very well because the board at one organisation, a bank I was talking to recently, said their problem is that they can't hire more developers. They're maxed out. There's no more capability. So they actually need to just start getting them more productive. So that became a big feature. And the compliance message, if you can talk to them about that, that's a big one as well. There's a lot of things like that. One of the things we need to do better now, and in the DevOps reports, if you look for the last 3 years, they've got lots of state of DevOps. They've got lots of good metrics. But the reality is we have to get off the geek metrics and onto the business metrics. So, that's the key point. Escape defects, new business opportunities, and better time to value. They're three I've been using. Hopefully there's a session on metrics sometime.
Yeah, great point. What are the metrics, the business metrics that you driving organizations to, or to get them to think about different things, or things differently as you're delivering new capabilities? And then secondly, what testing, how do you automate all the testing to deliver that, right? And ensure that you're not releasing more problems than
Yeah, testing's a big, it's interesting. Automated testing is a big fundamental piece of DevOps, right? And I like to talk about this. Normally an organisation that I go and look at, they'll say, oh, we've got automation in place, it's wonderful. And then I'll ask them about automated testing. And they'll say, yeah, we have automated testing. The testing team set the tests up and we're done. And I'm like, okay, that's great, but what about every new piece of change and functionality you do has new features and functions? We teach in DevOps that you're going to add, with every piece of code you write, you should always be adding a success case and at least one failure case, right, to the testing regime. And that's one of the differences and changes we need to put in place, right, is that we are, I was going to use the word religious, which is not the right word, but we are absolutely structured in the way that when we do our coding, we upgrade our testing set. Because if you don't do that, you're going to be out of sync very quickly. Thank you. All good? So I guess time, which is my friend, is now my enemy because there's a big red light up here. So we'll all blame Sanjay for taking my time. So I went quite accelerated, but have a great time here. Lots of good things and content in this track. This is going to be a fun track to be in. Enjoy it, and I'm sure by the end of today, you'll all be asking loads of questions. So thanks for having me, and I look forward to seeing you around. Thank you. Thanks.